Well, good morning if you are somewhere in the western part of North or South America. Good afternoon if you happen to be in North Carolina, if I pronounced that correctly, or New York City, where I live. And good evening to people all over Europe, Africa, Asia, all around the world where people listen to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. My guest today joins me from North Carolina, Victoria Livengood, beloved mezzo-soprano, also beloved teacher, who is celebrating her 40th year in the business, in the opera business. And I heard her at her very first Met performance and many, many times since. And because I was the manager then, when you made your Met debut, I was the performance manager. So
I remember.
I heard you. So Victoria, can I call you Vicky? That's what they call you?
Vicky, Miss Vicky, Vic. I basically answer to anything.
Well, I want to start by saying that you join us in North Carolina, which is the state where you were born.
Yes.
And I had tech troubles today, so I had trouble logging in. So I wrote down on a piece of paper singers whom I know from North Carolina, both opera and non. And I was surprised how many I came up with in the 10 minutes or so that Zoom was not helping. Tashina Vaughn,
Yes.
Nova Thomas,
Yes.
Anthony Dean Griffey, Lucas Meacham, John Cheek, and Rhiannon Giddens, and you in the opera world. And I'm sure there are others you can
There
tell
are
me.
more, yes.
And one of my favorite gospel singers, Shirley Caesar, is North Carolina.
Absolutely, yes.
Yep. And James Taylor, magnificent singer.
Right.
John Coltrane, Roberta Flack, and Nina Simone. So I think what unifies all these people, and these are just the ones who came to mind a few minutes,
Yeah.
they all have a lot of character. And I'm not saying that euphemistically. I mean that there's a depth to all these people
Oh,
that struck me as I made the list.
oh,
That
that's
is, it's not just the talent, which obviously is there, but there are many people from many states who have talent. But there's something very particular about y'all that I began to ask myself. And I should tell you, I have family in North Carolina, Winston-Salem.
oh, oh,
So
fantastic.
it's a state I know better than some of the other states. It's an incredibly beautiful state.
It
And
is
I'm
that.
not saying that because you're from there, but it just happens that the nature is spectacular. It's a horizontal state more than a vertical state.
Truth.
And therefore, it touches the Atlantic Ocean, the only part of the state I do not know,
Oh,
actually. I know South Carolina, the Atlantic, but not North Carolina. Then there's sort of a plain and there's a lot of agriculture, animals, and so on. And then these beautiful hills in the middle of the state and
oh,
tobacco farming and other agriculture for food. Um, and then you come into the Blue Ridge Mountain area, which is
yes.
absolutely gorgeous. And the air is often very beautiful in North Carolina. There is a big industry of furniture making that
Definitely.
is very central to it. It's a state that has several large but not massive cities, all of which have their own personalities, and their rivals are Raleigh and Winston-Salem and Charlotte and some of the others, Wilmington, where I've not been, and Asheville,
Yeah.
and each part of the state has it's like a Durham has
Right.
a microclimate that's different from other parts of the state in my experience.
True.
And there are other states in the US that are a little more uniform that way. And if you're in one part of the state, it's not unlike another part of the state. That's not a criticism, but Nebraska is Nebraska.
That's very true, but I'd never thought of it that way. True.
But North Carolina, which is a medium-sized state, it's neither the biggest nor the smallest, but there's so much diversity in terrain, in landscape. I've discovered in accents as I've studied the American South. There's a nasality to the North Carolina accent that you don't see in other parts of the South.
That's
I think for people watching us abroad, they may think of the American South as just sort of one massive area. It is
right.
so diverse from one place to the next. It is a large area with many states, but North Carolina, Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Florida,
Yeah.
Virginia, Kentucky qualifies as part of the South, although it in the war of 150 years ago it was on the other side.
Right.
but
That's funny.
um, but nonetheless, each of these places has their own very distinct characteristics. But I must say, Vicky, that in thinking in preparation for today, do you agree with me that North Carolina stands apart, not for being better or worse? It's just different from other southern states. And the people I know from there have a very particular, lovely character, but strong, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I know what you mean. And my God rest
Deliberate.
his soul, my daddy would say he definitely knows what you mean.
So
Strong-willed,
define that more.
opinionated. Yeah.
Define that more for people not from North Carolina or the South.
Well, I think most of us love where we're from. I think many of us return back to where we're from. After traveling the entire world, my husband and I were going to decide where we wanted to live, where we wanted to buy our forever home.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the natural choice was to move back home, what we call God's country, where
Mm-hmm.
I really like the barbecue. You left that out, and I like the sweet tea. And
Well,
you
the
just
barbecue,
love
okay,
the
the
barbecue.
barbecue sauce, is it North Carolina that uses vinegar?
A little vinegar, but
Good,
trust
okay.
me, until you've tried Lexington barbecue, you haven't had barbecue. I know my barbecue and my sweet tea. And I would like to add an adjective to your beautiful list of things that you find about North Carolina singers, North Carolina people. And that would be authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I find with teaching this many young, beautiful singers that I'm teaching now here in North Carolina, that there is an authenticity and a natural quality, not only to their personas, but to their voices and their singing. And what I'm making my prime goal and job in my studio is to find each singer's authentic sound, teach them the bel canto technique, but bring out their unique individualism. I think that is what separates us from a crowd. I
Mm-hmm.
find that is why people find North Carolina people unusually thoughtful, generous, helpful,
Yep.
kind,
Yep.
and open.
Mm-hmm.
And we love people. We love each other. We love our state. We're proud of our state. You mentioned a couple of singers that are not opera singers. So you might enjoy looking at the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame list.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone mentioned is in there, but the only opera singers in there is myself and my good friend Tony Griffey, Anthony Dean Griffey. And I
Yeah.
inducted Tony into the Hall of Fame here because he's a good bit younger than I am. So I was in
Tony,
first.
Tony and I have had an email for, I've known him for a long time, an email flirtation for years to record one of these. And eventually we will. I really want to.
I adore him. And everyone you mentioned, of course, Nova Thomas, we all go way back. There are many great singers from here. Again, I think when I tell people that I never had a voice lesson until I went to college and then became an opera singer very quickly, I mean, I was on a farm calling cows and pigs, thus the chest voice, perhaps, right? Maybe that's where the
Well,
contralto comes from.
all right. Because I was open about the fact that I have family in North Carolina and other parts of the South, but my North Carolina family is distinct, and I mean that in a very good way.
Yes.
Um, they too have a lot of personality and um, and are very proud, not in an unpleasant way, but very proud of where they live and who they are and what their state represents. And I'm going to say this without getting political, but something that's very particular to me about North Carolina is that I've known people who politically range from the extreme right to the extreme left.
This is true.
And other states seem to have more of a profile of one or the other. But literally, in North Carolina, I know people who cover the entire spectrum politically,
I agree.
and you cannot make assumptions about them based on your conversation with them. Whereas in other
Absolutely.
places, they kind of show their hand very quickly.
Yes, I agree with that. And that has to do again with what I'm saying about a comfort and an authenticity and a freedom in a way to be yourself. And that's part of what I loved about becoming an opera singer. Now, when I'm floating in the Laurel Park pool with my friends here, they have no idea until they go home and Google anything about what I do or
Yeah.
what I've done or what posters are on my walls. They
Hmm.
just know Vicki Livengood from Thomasville, North Carolina. Okay, when they find out in Google, they get a little starstruck for a minute, but then they realize that I am who I always was. And I've just been very blessed in my life to have an exceptional journey. And I'm
Hmm.
so grateful for it. And I've remained, I believe, myself.
Well, I'm going to mention one of the person, not by name, I can tell you his name after. One of my really dearest friends in the world is from New Bern, North Carolina,
Okay.
where I've never been. And he's exceedingly accomplished in the arts, he's world famous. And most people don't know that he came from New Bern and grew up on a pig farm. And
Oh,
when you mention that, and
wow.
he's not a singer, he did not call pigs, but he did explain to me he's the first guy I ever had a conversation with about the so-called holler. And a holler in the South is not a projection of sound, it's a distance. So
It's a
you live one
call.
holler away, two hollers away. Would you explain that more?
Well, I'll tell you the funniest story. I don't know if you were in the Met the night this happened, but October 25th, 2004, 2002, my first Carmen at the Met. My
Hmm.
mom and dad kind of rented an entire plane and brought half of North Carolina with them.
Yep.
My dad, when I took my bow, wanted me to know where he was in the house of 4,000. And so my dad did this holler. I would call it, he would call it calling the dogs. And there is no sound like it in the world, Fred, but I promise you it's diaphragmatic, it's belted, it's loud, and it is full of commitment.
Well, I raise this in part because my friend, he's in the arts, but not in opera. He explained to me that the way people heard one another out on the farm
Yes.
was projection,
Yes.
and that if you just said to me that you didn't have a lesson until quite late, and but you had, let's call it, the technique. Um, is there something, and I mean this in all seriousness, about the way people where you grew up in the rural part of North Carolina develop projection and communication?
I do believe that is true. I do believe that we have a natural resonance. I do believe that when I teach, say, one of my singers from China versus one of my singers from Charlotte, there is a very different, natural, authentic quality in their sound. I, as a teacher and as a singer, go by the speaking voice. I
Hmm.
if you come in here and you talk like this and you sing like that, I go, okay, something's rotten here. Something's off here. I think that singing is speech and projection with technique and breath under it. So I do believe that a lot of North Carolina singers have a natural quality to their sound. We have a round sound. There are certain adjectives in technique that we naturally have because of where we talk, where we resonate in our skulls. I do
Hmm.
believe that's different when I get a singer from Midwest. They're going to come in with a lot of nasality, and I have to add some room behind that. When they come
Hmm.
in and their tone is very dark and swallowed, let's say a Russian singer, you've
Yep.
got to add focus to that. So I feel like that chiaroscuro balance is something we all strive for. And if we're going for it authentically, we go for it from how we speak and how we project when we're just talking to each other like we are now.
Hmm. So I'm reminded that when I worked at the Met, we had a talented young Russian tenor come, Soviet tenor, and he had a beautiful natural voice, but his vowels were completely Russian. So
Yes.
his debut or one of his first roles was Mario Cavaradossi in Tuska. And we could not help but, you know, laugh, although he was a lovely guy and he didn't speak any English. I spoke to him in Italian, but his vowels were really awful. How do you fix that?
Well, again, I believe you fix that with placement, with tongue, with resonance, with range, with where you are in your range. I really, my students will tell you, I am a stickler for purity of vowel. I'm not a big over modifier of the vowel. I think the cleaner our vowels are, the better our diction is in all the languages.
Mm-hmm.
But that to me is one of the first things I do when I start technique. Once I deal with posture and breath and support, I go right to the vowels, and they're sick of the exercises, but
Yep.
you can hear the improvements in their sound, their
Mm-hmm.
ranges extend in a more natural way. Again, the word natural. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we should be faking or manipulating an operatic sound. And I remember Joan Dornaman telling me when I won the Met, and we were all in
Yep.
practice rooms getting ready for the competition. And I coached with Joan and I coached with Warren Jones and Joan Dornaman. And they both
Is
said,
Warren from North Carolina?
he's a very
He
good friend. And
certainly is.
another good story because when I met Warren, I'll go back to the other, but when I met Warren in New York,
Yep.
his uncle Red Seacrest was the tenor in my dad's famous barbershop quartet. My dad was bass, Warren's uncle Red was tenor. They were called the Dixie Colonels. And when Warren met me in New York, he goes, "Are you Jerry or David Livengood's daughter?" And I go, "Jerry's daughter and David's niece." And what a small world. But Warren and Jones said to me, "Vicky, this will work for you and against you. However, when we go downstairs at the Met to the practice rooms and we listen to 20 singers, we know which room you're in."
Uh-huh.
Aha. And they said that's going to either work for you or against you, but you have a very non generic, unique sound. They said, please embrace it. It will work for
Yep.
you. And I'll
Yeah.
never forget that. And that was 40 years ago.
Well, that kind of ties in with what I was saying before about North Carolinian singers, musicians whom I've worked with being very distinct and
Yes.
very unmistakable. Anthony Dean Griffey, Tony
Oh,
Griffey is the most perfect example of that of all. There will never be another one.
no, natural and kind. And what most people may not know about him that I certainly know is he is hilarious.
I
And
know.
we have actually, he will kill me for saying this, but we have been asked to leave a New York restaurant because we were laughing so hysterically we could not get control of ourselves. We've done the same thing in the middle of a performance at the Chicago Lyric. We just together are just trouble. We act like teenagers at a pajama party.
May I ask what opera it was at the Chicago Lyric? I hope not Peter Grimes.
No, it was La Boheme. And
Okay, that's okay.
Tony and I were singing in Streetcar Named Desire at the time.
Yes,
And so we
okay,
went as audience members, and we were supposed to
right.
be the diva and the divo and sitting properly. And we just, something hit us funny and we got tickled and we couldn't stop. It was like being in church at First Baptist when we were kids.
So Tony played Mitch, the Carl Malden role in Streetcar Named Desire. Renee Fleming was Blanche,
That's right, of
and
course.
and were you Eunice by any chance?
I am Eunice, the upstairs
Good.
what? Loud-mouthed, over-the-top neighbor. And that is where I first met Ryan McKinney as well on that run of streetcars. So let's say that streetcar has been a very good ride for me.
um, so here is an example which I want people from out of the country to really understand. Streetcar Named Desire is set in New Orleans. The
Right.
New Orleans and she's from Mississippi. She and
Ooh.
Stella are from Mississippi. The accent of New Orleans could not be more different from the accent of North Carolina.
This is
Yet
true.
you both are in the South. How? Let's take a British actress anyone and try to teach her, and she's not Vivian Lee, try to teach her to be a North Carolinian, or try to teach her to be someone from New Orleans, just to name two parts of the South.
Well, it's just like when I'm coaching, it's just as hard to coach Carlisle Floyd's Susanna. Like, ain't it a pretty night? And, a lot of these composers will go on and write in a phonetic that they're trying to ask you for, like instead of just, they'll say Jes, Jess.
Yes. Yeah.
They'll drop a consonant and say sitting instead of sitting.
Mm-hmm.
But what I mostly do, and even Renee, even after she had done a lot of these and recorded it, when she finally had me as Eunice, we were in the dressing room working on that accent and I said, now look, mine's North Carolina, it's not New Orleans, but in a similar way, you drop diphthongs. Mm-hmm. See, some states go, Virginia will go round about the house. And see, we don't do that at all.
No, in your border states, yeah.
Border, but we don't do that at all. And so when I show my students and I mimic it for them, they see that I drop the second vowel, hang on the first vowel. Vowels are broader and taller. Consonants are duller. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there is a method to the madness, but believe it or not, in Streetcar, helping Coach Renee, Ryan, anybody that wanted to listen to me talk, they came out sounding far more Southern and New Orleans, if you will.
So I was just thinking and listening to you, I've known and have very dear people to me from South Carolina,
okay,
which is tucked in down below there, and has good crap. But people I know in South Carolina, the letter E, like method or French, they say as an I, like French, method. Yours is somewhere between the E and the I, but not an E and not an I.
We do, I would say, more of an actual, what I call an vowel. My sound just changed, so I'm checking you. There we go. I think it's back on. We do an actual egg. Method, French. We actually do. We don't
How
say.
How would you say my first name?
Fred. I would.
Yeah.
But now my mother might say Fred. She might Fred.
Fred. You see, my people say Fred, F-R-A-Y-I-D.
True that. My sister-in-law, we all laugh when she says my name. It sounds like it's got 8 vowels in it. Yep. Vicky, that kind of thing.
And I'm bringing this up not just because it is very entertaining, but because I really want people to understand the work that goes into creating a role.
Yes.
Studying seriously, whether it's opera, musical theater, any form of expression, theater, acting theater, where you have to bring some degree of authenticity. So I was saying before, British actresses, I love Vanessa Redgrave, I love Maggie Smith. They cannot do Southern accents. I've heard them.
But let's look at a Meryl Streep who can basically do any accent at all.
True. Well, that's remarkable.
Obviously studied, like I was just watching Out of Africa recently. Mm-hmm. She's obviously, I'm fascinated by it. And, she can sing as well. She's obviously studied phonetics and maybe even IPA. Who knows? I'm not sure how actors write out their accent, but like when I'm doing a role with an accent, and certainly when I'm singing in 8 foreign languages with this accent, are you kidding me? So the Russian, for instance, I have to write out every single IPA sound. I have to coach it for months to get rid of my drawl and to form the Russian L and the Russian E vowel without swallowing my sound technically and vocally. Learning how to sing in your technique with a different language is very challenging. Thus, I was a French mezzo for the first 20, 25 years of my career because French suited my resonance and my authenticity as well as my height and, if you will, at that time, sex appeal. So the Met said, we are not wasting you in pants. You are going to be, I'm sorry, the house hooker.
But so Madalena, I saw you as Madalena in Rigoletto and you were very authentic.
Oh dear, yes.
But that character, although it's set in Italy, she's actually French.
Yes.
Because the origin of the opera Rigoletto, so that's in keeping.
Yes.
talking about sexy mezzos,
Oh,
um, I've known many in my time, but maybe the sexiest, even though I couldn't communicate with her all that much because we spoke in Italian, is
okay.
someone you appeared with in War and Peace at the Metropolitan Opera, which had a massive cast, Elena Obrazova,
Oh, love,
who,
love, love. Now, I don't know about the sexy part
well,
because I
she
don't
was
remember that.
older when I know, but she was, I mean, I worked with her a lot in Italy and somewhat at the Met. Um,
Right.
she was just, without trying to be sexy, she was
Just,
just one of the sexiest people, whether it's Delilah or
oh,
Santuzza
yeah. Okay,
or
yeah.
Eboli. And did you talk mezzo-ness at all with her in any language?
I did a little. Again, the language barrier was an obvious thing. And she was also working on the Russian, and her role, I've done that role as well. I later in my career recorded and did, and at the Met did that
Mhm.
role of
Yep.
Akrosimova instead of
Yep.
Princess Helene that I was when we did it in 2002. So we did talk mainly, though, Fred. What I did was sit as close by as I could and listen to the projection, listen to the resonance, listen to the balance in the tone, listen to the evenness of range, even at that age. And I now, the older I get, and I'm approaching, let's put it this way, I got my Medicare card in the mail. And that was an envelope that I cannot imagine yet opening, but there it was. And my birthday's coming up in August. And I realize that I'm saying to you, I've been doing this for 4 decades and am still going strong, and now have this second career of teaching alongside still performing. That longevity, that's going to be a word that will be used with
Yeah.
Livengood, Livengood longevity. Obratsova, longevity. I think longevity comes from what I said about the authenticity, about the natural quality to what you're doing. Then you can maintain it, and it can be consistent, and it can be healthy, and it can last a very long time with good technique.
Now, speaking of longevity, but also historic singers, I've seen you in all your Met roles,
Wow.
and you
Wow.
were Madalena in a couple of productions of Rigoletto,
Yes.
but
Yes.
in one of them, your Spada Fucile, your brother was Nikolai Giaudo.
Oh, I know, don't
Nikolai
I know?
Giaudo. Now,
Oh,
please say whatever you want about him. I want it recorded because Nikolai Giaudo was legendary in his time. He
yes.
was the husband of Morella Frani, and
Oh,
often
yes.
if she was in something, and she was the first great star I ever worked with, if she was in something, he'd come along and do a small role. So
Right.
I
So they
got
could
to
be
know,
together.
right, and she called him Nicola, and I got to know Nicola very well when we spoke Italian. But his performing,
Massive. It was massive. The word that comes to mind is massive. And as I mentioned earlier, my dad was a bass in a barbershop quartet. And that
Mhm.
was the only background I had until college
Yep.
in music or singing or any of that, gospel and barbershop. Okay. Well, my dad was a basso profundo. So I heard a massive, cavernous, deep depth in the sound my whole life. And everybody, my husband included, when he came to court me, was intimidated by my father's speaking voice because it was so low and so rich and so full bodied.
Hmm.
Here off, when I got in level C level stage, rehearsing the Rigoletto and starting the last act and hearing him next to me,
Yeah.
was like it was through a megaphone or something. It was so round and voluptuous and massive. And I'm sure I couldn't remember my line when I said fratello. I'm sure I was like, oh my God, what do I say next? Ha ha rido bendicore. So it was crazy. And then Franny would come and watch us. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm singing in front of Morella Franny. The whole thing was surreal for me because at that time I was still young in the business and starstruck and in awe. But of course, I knew of their incredible careers and reputations, and they couldn't have been more lovely and more
Yeah.
kind to me and helpful. Yeah.
For your context, I got my Medicare card 3 years ago. So
It's a thing, right? It's a thing. ARP is
We love
calling.
it.
And I'm like, no,
We
don't
love
call
it.
me, please.
We love it. But the thing is that it means that you and I were basically contemporaries at the Met. I began there in
Absolutely.
1979 as a youngin, as y'all would say.
Wow.
And yeah. And before that, I worked at La Scala, and I got to know Franny and Gaudiv and Carreras and Capuccilli,
Oh,
those
wow.
people at La Scala when I was very, very young. And it was Franny who helped get me my job at the Met.
Lovely.
So, so really,
Lovely.
really lovely. And at that time, you could walk the hallways in sea level, which is the rehearsal area downstairs,
No
and
windows.
basically no windows. All, or the cafeteria on A level,
Oh,
all the great opera stars of the world were there.
there.
And the way it was structured in the cafeteria is that if there was an empty seat at a table, anyone could come and sit next to you. So
Anybody.
that, for example, one time I was just eating on my own, and John Vickers sat down next to me.
Oh,
And,
my.
and I said hello,
Wow.
John, and he said
Wow.
hello, Fred. And that was it. But
Oh, but still.
but
And so
eating
you were able to speak in Italian to them at that time. And I'm
with
sure
many of
that
them.
with everybody, that was the universal language. Honestly, though, when I was hitting my heyday and my prime at the Met, other than doing the Carmens and the French stuff, I was also doing the weird things like Lulu and Wozzeck. And so I was also working with like Teresa Stratas. And one of my Carmen performances ended up, I went on as a cover once as Carmen, and it was Neil Schikoff. And, of course, there is the unbelievable moment when I went on with Domingo and we had never even met and we were
Mhm.
meeting each other on stage doing the Seguidilla. The whole thing was just, I'm out of body at that point.
Well, there's the
Pavarotti,
man I worked
I mean, on and on, Jones, everybody was
right,
there. Troyanos, everybody.
right.
Reese Stevens,
Domingo is I mean, all those people I worked with a lot. Domingo is the man I really worked with a lot because he
I'm
was so
sure,
prodigious in work. But
prolific.
among the things he's very famous for, and I'd like you to talk about it, he is the model colleague in terms of if you are new, if you're doing a jump in, which means substituting at the last minute,
Wow.
um, he will make everything easy for you.
It's
And
unbelievable.
there's no rivalry. Would you talk about this jump in of Carmen and what it was like to
One of my
suddenly play with
favorite,
them?
will I talk about it? I'll pay you to let me talk about it. It is one
I'll
of
just
my
I'll
favorite
just take some barbecue sauce.
You got it. Next time you're in North Carolina, I'll take you to my favorite place, okay?
Okay.
Introduce you to my mama and my
Yes,
family, and you can really hear some Southern,
I
okay?
love
Yeah,
that.
you bet. Well, I'll tell you right now, that first time that I did Carmen at the Met before my performances was a jump in, and it's such a story for covers. It's a crazy story. I tell my students all the time. I was covering Denise Graves, which I did a good bit of at that time because there were a lot of Carmens going on and I was covering, and then they gave me my own performances, which I never expected in my life. So it was a dream come true. So I was covering Denise, and I get a call in my Greenwich Village little studio apartment on Perry Street, and it's about 30 minutes before final orchestra dress. No warning. Now I'm going to be to the Met at 11 for the start to sit in the dark hall with a little monocle writing notes, but I'm not warmed up. I haven't had a good breakfast, etc. I've never had a costume fitting yet. I get the call and I hear the Ride of the Valkyries was my ringtone for the Met because it scares you every time. And I went, hello. And it was Lenore. And she goes, get here as fast as you can.
Lenore Rosenberg.
I
Yes.
grab a banana, I jump in a taxi, and I haul it to the Met. Back then, the cab pulled under at the stage door, the old garage.
Yep.
There are 10 people lined up in the garage. I have been eating a banana and vocalizing in the taxi. The taxi driver, I get out and he goes, lady, no charge.
That's
I'm like, oh my.
very New York.
And then I'm in the garage and they're putting my hair in pin curls. They're putting a corset on. They're putting blush and lipstick on. They're telling me what the lay of the land is. It was insane. Fortunately, and I tell my students this too, don't ever do a big, huge title role at the Met without having done it other places. I don't know what number I had done, but I've done 250 Carmen. So this maybe was number 150. so I could push a button and get out the castanets. So thank God for that.
Mhm.
But I go on, and there's no time to meet Placido before we get out there. So this is hilarious. I'm telling you, we can't talk during the first act. There's no time. Second act, I'm doing the castanets and I lie down on the platform, and I'm 5'10", so a lot more to navigate than Denise. He has to get down on top of me. And so you can see him looking and studying and then getting on top of me. And I swear, and I've told Placido this story, and he says, really? He whispered in my ear, Victoria, ciao, do not move your left knee. That's the first hilarity, okay? And then the second thing he said to me is, oh my God, your eyes are gorgeous.
Oh.
And then in the third act, here's where what you asked about Placido Domingo comes to play, because it's unbelievable. I sing the card aria. He doesn't even really know my name, I don't think.
Yeah.
I sing the card aria. I shuffle the cards and lay my head down. And I look under my arm, and they're applauding, and Placido's feet are there, his boots. He's supposed to be up on the mountain. He's standing beside me, holding his gun at me in the applause. And he goes, Victoria, do you sing Marina? Now, Fred, I didn't know what Marina was. I didn't know the opera, the role, the range, the tessitura, the nothing. I smiled and I looked at him scared for a character and went, absolutely. The next day, I had a contract to sing Marina in Boris Godunov at the D.C. Kennedy Center in Washington with Randy and a cast of thousands. Lead role. Domingo hired me without knowing one thing about me. He heard me. He worked with me on stage during that dress rehearsal. I got the contract. When I made that debut, my parents were in the house, and he introduced me, and he said, this is Victoria Livengood, the only mezzo-soprano I ever hired at gunpoint. Isn't that fabulous?
So I'm going to talk about him more because for many reasons now, people don't talk about him or they don't talk about aspects of him.
Right.
I learned a phenomenal amount from him,
Yeah.
really a phenomenal amount. He was very open and sharing in his willingness to educate someone who was open to being educated.
Absolutely.
When I wrote my book, Opera 101, he offered to write the introduction to the book.
Oh, wow.
Get it out there, which I appreciated.
Incredible.
But a number of years later, which is to say he obviously is still performing, but he had managerial jobs in many opera companies, primarily in Washington and Los Angeles. And I've worked at both of those companies a fair amount. And for one of those companies, he called me in and he said, I want you to come and listen to the auditions we do for the Young Artist Program. I don't want you to tell me your opinion of the singers or who we should hire and why we should hire them. But after we do the hires, then I want to sit down and talk to you about why we hired the people we hired. And it was fascinating because I sat there for hours in the auditions, just two seats behind him and the other managers of the company. And I kept a list of the people I would hire. They hired 5, and I picked 4 of the 5.
Very good.
But then he really sat and spoke to me as if there was no other thing for him to do in the world.
Which is, we know, not true.
Of course.
The busiest person I know.
Educate me. And he used a word that I'd never heard used before in opera that sticks in my head all the time. Elements. He was saying that the singers we chose all had elements. And I never asked him to define that. His English is excellent, but I thought maybe it comes from the Spanish and it means something else in Spanish than in English. But I think that what he was saying, because the singers he hired were not necessarily the most prepared. They were not the ones you could put on the stage now.
But
these are the people, potential. They had elements that could be developed. And I've kept in touch with 3 of the singers, and they're doing very well. They're still young artists, or at the beginnings of careers. And one of them right now is a baritone. He's an American, but he's singing in Taiwan. Another one is an American soprano, and she's singing, I think, right now in London. And then there was a mezzo, and I don't quite know what she's up to now. But none of the 3 seem quite ready to go on stage at Washington, LA, or the Met. But
Now, I'm curious, Fred, how long ago was that? Was
10
it
years ago,
okay? Because my singers all ask me this too. I do believe that I'm guessing, because I've never heard that word used in describing singers' elements, but I'm guessing he means qualities,
I would think
uniqueness,
so.
special qualities,
And I
potential.
mean, I've never heard any person who would hire a singer or train a singer even use that word.
But back in the day, everybody was looking for potential. Nobody was looking at final product at the Met competition, or I would not have won. Believe you me,
Hmm.
I would not have won. I would not have had this 40-year unbelievable 10 months on the road career. No way.
No.
I tell my students that. They sing way better than I sang when I won. Way better. They have better technique. They're more prepared. They have a broader repertoire, all of that. But back in my day, it was on potential, refining a diamond in the rough.
Hmm.
Operative word rough. So I think that sounds like Placido was listening for what can we do to help them meet their potential and be great.
Right. So I'm going to push back just a little on what you just said, even though I basically agree about hiring people with potential.
Yeah.
Um, I too have been a judge in the Met competition, not in the New York area because there are so many of us here, but
Right.
places in the American South, actually. And I've sat with very august colleagues as judges, some of whom you've sung with,
Yes.
and people of that level. And I'm not a singer, but I've worked in this art form since
Oh, yes. Oh.
1972.
And you know
And
all the greats. You've heard all the greats, and yeah.
right, and I'm humble enough to know what I can't do. I know what I'm good at, but I really know what I cannot do, and I would never pretend. But what struck me on one of these juries is that the colleagues who were singers were looking for people, in the case of tenors and Wagnerian sopranos, who were ready to be thrown into the deep end of the pool.
Okay.
And I heard a woman from Mississippi who was quite young. She was completely rough, raw talent who could be refined, I felt, into a Salome or something like that with 10 years of work.
Ah, a
And
decade.
they agreed with me that she was the most exciting, but
Mm,
not what we were looking for. She was very young. And I felt that she probably had never had a proper singing lesson,
yeah.
but the elements, to use Blasso's word, were all there.
Yes.
And I mean, she looked great, but that, I don't go on the beauty, but she had the look of a Salome to
Uh-huh.
me.
Which is rare.
And yeah, and she had a big voice, but not an unruly voice. It had a nice sound to it.
So
She
obviously
didn't,
you could hear that with technique it could develop beautifully.
but she didn't sing Salome. She sang Lisa from Queen of Spades, which was
Uh-huh.
a very unusual pick.
Queen of Spades.
And interesting because it brought out her vulnerability, which to me could be an element of Salome.
Interesting.
And
I
so the
rarely
colleagues,
hear that aria on the Met list these days,
I
honestly.
know, I know that. And it was very moving.
Yes. And I like to hear
I mean,
something I haven't heard a lot of.
yeah, I know. All right, so let's talk about that. When we are in juries or when we are hearing competitions and or if we're auditioning for an opera company and we're told to bring five arias.
The
And many
pack.
teachers I know will coach a young artist to have a diversity to usually have a Mozart and or a Handel, a
Yeah.
Verdi, of something in
Conto.
English,
Yeah.
right? And and therefore to bring that package. But then at the Met competition, where I've been countless times, and I ran into you at the last one,
Right.
um, the singers, some of them do very well bringing the Violettas and the Lucias, and will others bring something completely, Mazeppa and, and I don't know,
Bizarre things where
very
sometimes we're
bizarre
on the
things.
panel and we go, and there recently in Pittsburgh, I was on the panel with one of my favorite conductors and one of my favorite managers and myself. And
Yep.
we look at each other, we look at the list and we go, has anybody heard of that? I can't even remember what it was because I've never heard of it since. And what did we do? We all said, well, let's hear it. And then
Mhm.
afterwards, we said, there's a reason we haven't heard of it.
Right. But I mean, for example, if you hear a young soprano or 10 sing Mimi or Lucia or Violetta,
Yeah.
what can they usually bring that you've not really heard before? And isn't it maybe preferable to bring something not esoteric unless it's really perfect, but something that shows the voice, the temperament? I guess I'm asking a lot of coaches I know say, do Violetta because they're always looking for Violettas. Do Mimi, they're always looking for Mimis. What
Yeah,
would you do? What would you advise?
I don't advise that way because, again, I'm going for this authentic yourself, your qualities or elements, as Placido said, that separate you from a crowd and a sea of other singers, and especially if you're a poor soprano, because there are so many. Down here I am, dramatic, mezzo, contralto, whatever, sung the gamut of repertoire for the mezzos. My studio is filled with sopranos coming here to try to improve their middle voices and to learn how to use their chest voice. I have a handful of phenomenal mezzos, but way more sopranos, and then a few tenors, baritones, basses. But most of my studio, the bulk of it, like the rest of the world, is sopranos. What do I say to them? Am I going to give all of them the Jules song or Je veux vivre? No. Just because I need movement? No. What we do here is we're striving to make each one choose and find what they can do and bring to the table better than most others. They may not, they're probably not. I might have one or two cases where I think it's the best one I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, you absolutely, that's your calling card. You must start with this aria and do it everywhere you go. And sure enough, it has given them openings and doors and opportunities. But with others, we strive to find what is your best fit. And I think every soprano that rings that doorbell has different qualities. Their tessitura, their happy shelf, where their rose blooms, as I say, is different. Mm-hmm. Where they're comfortable, where they're afraid. Does their voice move or does it like to be taffy? All of these things go into me helping them try on things and choose what's best for them. I want them to succeed. I want them to be separated and to be memorable. How did I get a career as Carmen against all the other mezzos in New York auditioning at Studio 58? I went in there with a red rose in my hair. I took my shoes off. I sang that aria. They had a bunch of headshots on the table. And then after it was over and they said, thank you, what else did you bring? I said, oh, I'm so glad y'all liked that. I also brought mon coeur s'ouvre à voix. And I went like that because when they left that audition and went back to Kansas City, they said, let's give that tall Southern girl a shot at Carmen. She was pretty good. And one led to another.
How do you pronounce Dalila?
Delilah. Lila, and I named my Tahoe after her because she paid a lot of my bills. I've got a Carmen Prius in the driveway and a Delilah Tahoe. Of course, Delilah is the bigger of the two. Absolutely. But it's true. Be authentic. I'm right back to what I started with. That's what I'm preaching here.
But this raises a very serious point. I agree with you 100%. And something I've discussed with other teachers, many of the mezzos, because you all happen to be good teachers in my experience.
I don't know why that. Why
so really, that? No, I mean that. There's something about the authenticity, the connecting. I don't know if you know Catherine Cook, a wonderful mezzo.
Oh, of course, no, we've worked together. And yeah, actually, we were in their Onegin together a year and a half ago.
In San Francisco.
Yeah, in San Francisco. Yeah. So we were rehearsing.
Similar
together.
Thing that she's just practical and to the point and so on. And I recently recorded a conversation with her, and I brought up something that I'm going to bring up more with you than I did with her. Did you ever in your career come across an Irish teacher? She was the leading singing teacher in Ireland named Veronica Dunn. And Veronica...
I knew the name, but I have not run across her.
There's a singing competition named for her. I knew her. She died a couple of years ago at a very old age. And she was in La Traviata in Rome with Maria Callas in 1950.
Oh, wow.
And Veronica was living in a convent in Rome
Oh,
because her Irish
amazing.
family wouldn't let her live in a hotel or a pensione in Rome in 1950 with La Dolce Vita going on. So she had
Ah,
to live in a convent. And she
wow.
studied and learned from Callis.
Oh
And
my
she brought her
goodness.
singing technique back to Ireland, the bel
Oh,
canto technique. And
fantastic.
because it's a small country, she taught at the Royal Irish Academy of Music, not just singers, but teachers. So many of the teachers who now teach in Ireland teach on the Veronica Dunn method. That's one. Lucina Mara, the great American soprano, is
Know
also
of, but never ran across, but of course know
okay.
of.
So those two ladies, Veronica got to about 90 and Lucina's in her 90s. I'm spoiling it. Sorry, Lucine.
And
And she too has a Medicare card. And how can I describe this? Both wonderful singers, wonderful teachers, charisma, authenticity, beautiful voices, and so on. Their technique of teaching is something that we can't quite get away with nowadays. And by that, I mean not just physical touch to indicate where things are and how things move and happen, but the discussion of emotions and vulnerabilities that exist in characters, and frankly, for me, exist in the musical score or the libretto,
right.
um, that we need to awaken in our singers without number one dictating it to them, or number two going wherever that is that may be offensive, upsetting, whatever. Yet opera characters go through all this stuff that most people in their daily life, if they go through that, I'm sorry for them. If you know, I mean, Carmen has a bad day.
Yes, a lot of bad days.
I know. And the cards are not good for Carmen.
Right.
But what I mean is very seriously, I got to work with Veronica Dunn, and she touched young singers in places that we just don't touch people there. And I'm not saying we
You
should
mean physically as well as
physically,
emotionally?
physically.
Okay.
Um, whereas other teachers more emotionally, where they really, Kristen Ludwig could do that, where she would kind of get people, or Elizabeth Schwarzkopf would get them very unhappy, let's put it that way, to,
Yes.
to get at the emotional core of the
Yes.
role,
Yes.
especially Schwarzkopf. Whereas Veronica Dunn was cheery and positive and so on, but very tactile.
Hmm.
And, you know, with a young woman, she would say, well, we're women, it's okay. But I would see her, I would be in a class with her touching young men, Irish young men,
Hmm.
who were very shy or shocked, whatever. And
Hmm.
for Veronica Dunn, who I adored, by the way, let's not get this wrong, it was second nature because this is what you have to do to get the results on of the sound. And they
True.
weren't offended, and they didn't feel that she was being untoward. But on the other hand, I think it's a lot more of a calculation now.
I agree.
You know the mezzo Tara Arot, the Irish mezzo.
No, I do
She
not.
didn't sing much in the States. She's a big star in Europe, singing a lot of your repertory. Was Veronica Dunn's most famous student,
Okay.
and
Well,
she's
and
based
mezzos don't just tend to run across each other,
she's based in
because we're
music.
doing,
So,
yeah, separate things. But
right.
yeah, no, I don't know her.
But anyway, Tara told me that she just got used to being touched that way. It was
Okay.
never sexual, it was never anything like that, but it was just graphic and to the point to
Yes,
accomplish.
because how else can you be sure? I mean, you can hear it and you can see it, but until you touch it and until they understand, I'll be honest with you, I always make sure, and certainly if it, first of all, I have students record their lessons. Nobody comes in here without a video recording, and me as well, for proof, protection, whatever. My husband's an attorney, so
Okay.
I am careful in that way. I often have my pianists and coaches in here with me. Certainly when I'm working with a man, for sure. I never touch anyone without asking permission, all of that for sure. But I have learned through COVID even and doing so much Zoom business all over the world. I had singers from Zoom from Australia to China to Korea, on and on, Taiwan,
Mhm.
during COVID. I have developed the Livengood method, which totally uses a lot of bizarre, never thought of, I think, tools and various things that help them get in touch with their breath and their pelvic floors and their support without me touching them. Everything from a thigh master to a Pilates ring to a gymnastic ribbon to straws. We're bubbling. We're all about all of this stuff so that they actually feel. And once they feel and go, oh, a light bulb goes off and they go, I see what you mean about breathing to the back. But most of the time, the most efficient thing I can do to teach them quickly is have them touch me.
Okay.
I don't touch them so much. I stand in front of them and let them hug me and let them feel the appoggio and let them feel the intercostals and the low back breath and the pelvic seat and let them feel the whole shebang. And then I produce sound and then they go, oh my God. And then I do it wrong the way they're doing it and high and lifted and clavicle and let them hear how I'd sound if I did it their way. And then I let them hear how they could sound if they do it my way. And I find that extremely efficient.
And what's the purpose of a pogo stick
Oh my gosh, I'm going to tell Brody Bett and his mother Dana today that on this interview all over the world, they ask about the pogo stick. Because never in my life, Fred, not even my Grammy award-winning recording of Ghost, nothing has ever gotten this many views as my 14-year-old prodigy of a kid, Brody Bett. He put it on Instagram. His mom took it not a month ago in a lesson here. He put it on Instagram, just this short little blob. And 2 million plus views and crazy shares. And voice teachers all over the country are writing me going, what are you doing with a pogo stick? Now, granted, since people pay me a lot of money to come here for my method and my crazy tools and my crazy Miss Vicky ideas, I don't like to share too much information. Okay. But obviously, I'm using the pogo stick to aid in posture, body alignment, grounding, pelvic floor work, relaxation. It gets him settled, if you will. And it works on a 14-year-old and a 65-year-old.
And I'm just remembering that Pogo is a cartoon character from what state in the South? I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
He goes fishing, F-I-S-H-I-N apostrophe, fishing.
That is so funny. But isn't it wild? I don't teach kids. I don't. But this kid is such a prodigy and has perfect pitch. He started with me as a boy soprano. I've taken him through the vocal change. Now he's a baritone. And now we're developing him into the opera and the classics to hopefully go to college and sing. So it's the full gamut.
I want to talk to you about two ladies from the Bronx, one a soprano, one a mezzo. I could also talk about Regina Resnick, who was both and from the Bronx. But Roberta Peters, did you ever meet her at all? The soprano?
I did meet her, of course. I did meet her early on in my career, I believe, if my memory serves, at the Met gala party kind of thing. I believe she judged me early on, maybe.
Yeah.
Because, I was judged by, it was insane, even a
Because she spoke to me about you. That's why I'm...
Oh, how lovely. My God, you're kidding.
She flagged you for me.
No.
And, yeah. But the reason I bring her up is...
my mind, honestly, because she's just a mega, mega huge star. I adore her.
But I'm bringing her up for a different reason. She, well into her old age, and she was a beautiful woman.
Beautiful.
Who remained in phenomenal physical shape.
Yes.
And kept her voice perfect so that she could sing Gilda at 65. Except that they were not hiring her to do Gilda at 65. But the way that she remained in shape was that she was a student of the original Dr. Pilates.
Okay, my goodness.
Yeah.
Because I'm all about the Pilates. Yes.
She introduced me to Dr. Pilates. It didn't have any effect. But
it might on other parts of your life, right? Good breathing is good for a lot of stuff.
But the thing is that she was a disciple of Dr. Pilates. And more than any singer I ever knew, came always incredibly prepared. A person who loved her, who we know in common, was Warren Jones. When Roberta died, Warren and I communicated about that. They worked together, and he was someone who understood that just because she was not hired for roles that were young girl roles when she was 65, even though she could have sung them. He helped her explore repertory that otherwise she would not have sung.
That's
And
great.
I credit Warren for that, for extending his career. So that's one girl from the Bronx. The other girl from the Bronx, who I knew and I know you knew, and I've never spoken about her on this program, is the lovely Risa Stevens.
Oh, you take my breath away when you just say her name.
Talk
Oh,
about Risa.
oh my goodness. Well, without emotion, I really am not sure I would be sitting here talking to you today as a successful opera singer and diva, Dixie diva, if it weren't for Rize, because I'm not sure I would have won the Met auditions. Because you were talking about potential before, and she is the reason that my potential mattered at the 1985 Met auditions, and the reason I won. And you can look at the trajectory of my whole career and see that that win is what took me from the South to New York, what got me a manager the day I won, what got me the Met saying, do you want to come into the Young Artist Program, or do you want to go out and sing Carmen all over the country? That kind of thing. Because she said on the radio, if you have the old 1985 Winners Concert, I think she said it after I sang Mignon, Connais-tu le pays, which was a role she was known for as well.
Yeah.
After that, on some radio broadcast we all did prior to the Winners Concert, she says on that cassette tape that I have, I love this girl. She reminds me of me.
Yeah.
And oh my God, that took my parents. My parents had no idea I could win until I won. Why would they? It took their breath away because my dad, even though he didn't follow opera or love opera, he loved her in The Chocolate Soldier. And I told her the history. My parents, when my mom was only 13, went on their first date to see The Chocolate Soldier with Risa Stevens and Nelson Eddy.
Mm-hmm.
And then Risa Stevens is my judge, or one of my judges for the Met competition in New York in 1985. We had seen Going My Way with Bing Crosby, so we knew her Hollywood career. I had heard her sing the habanera on that movie and thought, oh, this is the best thing I've ever heard. So once I won, Risa was like taking me under her wing. She's the reason that I sang Carmen 250 times all over the world. She's the reason probably that I did it at the Met. My dream come true. The greatest night of my life. I give her credit for all of that because when we had lunch and tea, she shared with me all of her thoughts and her ideas about Carmen. And she, to me, was so far ahead of her time in her authenticity and her trusting and committing to what she could bring to that role. She talked to me for hours about what can Vicky, she said, sitting here talking to you, I think you're this, 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 and this. Put that in your Carmen. She told me not to play her as, a hard chord, mean-spirited, tough. Some of the people at the Met played it that way. She said, girlfriend, show your sense of humor because you've got a big one, and so does Carmen. She said, if you want sympathy in the fourth act, it is all in when he asks you, do you love me or not? And often people laugh. She said, it's your timing and your delivery of the next line that gets you a standing ovation. She taught me to bite my skirt with my teeth and pull it up above to my thigh in the sigadilla. She taught me to hum in the tra-la-las with Zuniga instead of saying the words to make it different. So she said, take my bits, they're yours. And I took them. But honey, I could say she built my house because Carmen definitely paid for my house, many houses. And Risa Stevens is the reason that became my signature role and that I had the career and saw the world that I saw. I owe her so very much.
She lived to 99, almost 100.
Almost 100.
And by the time I met her, she was no longer a singer, but she was in some ways one of the voices of the Metropolitan Opera.
Absolutely. Firestone, all of that.
Firestone. But I mean, also the Met broadcast, the luncheons, the galas. She would show up and be the continuity, along with Francis Robinson and Peter Allen and sometimes me and a few other people.
She was so
Um,
beautiful and elegant, and talk about
always
maintaining her beauty and her
she did.
class. She was
Yep.
classy.
And she had a lovely husband and a handsome son who was an actor,
Yes.
and Nicholas Survey, I think
Yes.
was his name,
Yes. And Walter, her
and
husband.
Walter, that's right. And she was always there for everyone, but did not push it, so to speak. So
Right.
the greatest day of my Met career was October 22nd, 1983. That was the 100th birthday of the Met. We had this magnificent gala that I was one of the people responsible for. It was exhilarating. It was exhausting. It went on for like 20 hours, literally, and a live international broadcast. Almost everybody in the opera world sang. Most theaters closed. The only ones we did not have were Renato Scotto, Tatiana Troyanos, Hildegard Behrens, and one more, I forget who. But basically everyone else in the opera world was there.
Amazing.
And we had in the like 19th hour or the 18th hour this thing where we put these legendary artists on the stage in chairs.
Yes.
Risa Stevens, Yarmila Novotna, Zika Milanov, all the greats who were still alive. And the curtain rose and the audience saw them and went
Oh,
wild. And they all stood up
yes.
as one. And then they got the cue to sit down. And they all sat down except for Zinka Milanov, who remained standing and took the bows as if they were just for her.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And seated next to her
Wow.
was Risa Stevens, who at a certain point gently tugged on her gown and said, "Sit down, Zinka."
Sit down, dear. Oh,
The
my
show was
goodness.
already 19 hours long.
How incredible.
And the next artist to come out and sing, because frankly, at the very end, they saved the horns, the Pavarottis, and the Prices, and the Nielsen's for that end. And
Yeah.
was Marilyn Horne, who came out
Oh,
and took a bow and then made a beeline for Risa Stevens, passing Zinka Milanov and hugging Risa.
oh, that must have been the most incredible
And
moment.
indicating to the audience, that's Risa Stevens.
That is the Rita Stevens. And you
And
know,
then
these
Marilyn,
kind of things you're talking about with these, where they put all the Met stars on the stage.
yeah,
You know, these Opera Guild luncheons that they have, and they always single out someone and they honor them and all of that. Those luncheons that I've had the pleasure of being invited to in New York, where hundreds of opera singers, from the covers to the small roles, that to
yep.
somebody like Charlie Anthony or Tony Latura, to Netrebko, to Renee, to everybody. Here we all are, our age, older. The last time I was at that luncheon, I was loving and hugging and taking pictures with another of my very favorite mezzos, Rosalind Elias.
Yes.
And I have a photo of me with all the mezzos got together, and I hope I don't leave anybody out, but it was Elena Zaremba, me, Roz Elias, Denise Graves, Dolores Zajic.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm not leaving anybody out, but it is Mezzo Power. We
Yep.
all love each other. We stick together. You know, Roz actually directed me in Samson and Delilah in Kansas City
Mm-hmm.
as a director. So I got to work with her for a month and get all of her ideas and pick her brain about Vanessa and all that. It was great.
Now, I can tell you what I was doing at that luncheon because I specifically requested to be the date of Evelyn Lear.
Oh, you know the luncheon I'm talking about. It was to
I do
honor
indeed.
Donna Trebko. Yeah.
And I said, I want Evelyn Lear.
Oh, how fabulous,
I was
though.
very, very
They're
happy. This
lovely.
is someone that, if
I remember
people
that.
listening don't know the name of Evelyn Lear, look her
Oh,
up.
oh, look her
Magnificent
up.
artist.
As they say in
Magnificent.
Lysistrata, look it
Yeah.
up.
So, another person that you knew and I'd love to talk about, I know you're teaching soon, I'm mindful of that, was Giancarlo Menotti.
Oh, you're hitting all the absolute favorites for me, the ones that tug at my heart, the ones that I can cry when talking about.
Go right
Um,
ahead.
and the ones that have truly, I believe, informed my performing and my career. And with Menotti, I would say that it was the second half of the career, more where Rize was the first half with all the Carmens. By the time I was 46, 47, I decided that would be my last Carmen, not because I couldn't sing it, but because I couldn't jump on the table with a tambourine anymore and look good doing it. I was like, enough, I want to eat a burger. Okay, so yeah, thanks. I want to get a burger. So in the early 90s, I was going to sing in Spoleto at Charleston. So Menotti was in the audition and hired me for that, but we didn't work closely together. That was singing Il Contori, Isoliero. And I saw him, I met him, I went gaga over him, but that was it. Maybe 3 or 4 years later, my manager got a note and said Menotti would like to audition Miss Livengood for the secretary and the consul for Spoleto, Italy. And I was like, oh my goodness, I would love to spend my summer in Spoleto, Italy. I love Menotti. I love singing in English. I was known for modern opera at the time. I went into Studio 58 in a cattle call audition. He heard me sing, I think, 4 arias maybe. And I got the role. That summer was 1998. And after 4 decades in the business, imagine that I can honestly say that was the best summer opera experience of 4 decades. It was a family atmosphere. It was an old school Hollywood atmosphere, which I love. We were driven around in Jaguars. They were the sponsors for the festival. Big stars were coming in and singing in the Piazza Duomo. It was magical. Birds, bells, gelato. Menotti's
black truffle on your pasta.
Oh, black
Don't forget
truffle.
the black truffles on the pasta.
Truffle, and Menotti pays for everything. He's like, bring her another truffle pasta. Learning his music, his style, his commitment to story, that changed me. That changed me and developed me, I believe, and was the turning point for me reinventing myself as a character mezzo. And really, yes, Carmen, yes, it used my acting and dancing chops, sure, but not in the way that Baba in the Medium does. Not in the way that I've been able to explore all these characters and bring these hags like an Azucena, whatever, to life. Menotti and his commitment to story and honesty when you perform changed that direction for me and made me embrace the second half of my career. The consul, the secretary, the recording on Chandos with Richard Hickox conducting, the incredible cast of incredible singers that became best friends for life with me. I'm still best friends with all of them. I'm in touch with all of them. We were so close-knit because Menotti wanted us to eat together, sleep together, pray together, be together all the time, be a company and a family, and tell this story. And that recording shows it. You can hear it. Fred, he worked with me for hours on how to pitch the word next, how to have no vibrato, how to pitch it with the right chiaroscuro, how to take the stamp and hit the stamper. And what I learned about that, and then you also may or may not know, you probably know because you know everything about opera, that he died in Monte Carlo.
I do know that.
But people often ask why. Why would Giancarlo die and not in Scotland at his castle there or in Spoleto, Italy? Why would he die in Monte Carlo? Vicky Livengood, who he called a trashy mezzo, was debuting at l'Opera di Monte Carlo as the medium, as Baba. And his son, Chip, Francis Menotti, was directing me for the first time in that opera. Giancarlo came to Monte Carlo to see the opening night. Then he passed away unexpectedly. I was there. I was in the hospital. I sang at the memorial. I sang for his funeral. That happened in Monte Carlo because he had come to take another bow. He loved the applause and the bowing more than anybody except maybe Milanov or whoever.
And Mignon Dunn.
Oh, Mignon Dunn! Oh my God! So Giancarlo had come to take another bow. That was his, and to see his son and my performance and to be there. He loved it so much. So anyway, here is the final thing he said to me as he was really on his deathbed. He said, the one thing I want you to tell everyone, I want you to be an ambassador for my music. He said, I wrote these roles for you before I knew you. That made me just sob.
Wow.
He said, I wrote it, but I didn't know you. He said, Marie Powers was incredible, but he said she couldn't sing like you. And he
Hmm.
said, you have brought something to the role that I didn't know could be brought, and be an ambassador. So I am a Menotti ambassador for sure.
Yep.
And I just sang the console last summer, a year ago in LA, which was full circle for me. However, Menotti said, my music, it is just as important what is in the fermatas and the silences as what is
Hmm.
on the page. He said, so when you do the opening night, tomorrow night in the medium, in the seance, in the silence, count to 45. I said, what? I can't count to 45. I'll make the orchestra go overtime and they'll fire me. He said, count to 45 and then give me the most blood curdling scream you can muster. Fred, I didn't tell anybody. I counted to 45. As I screamed, the audience screamed back like a silent movie, or like Audrey Hepburn and Wait Until Dark or whatever. Somebody jumping at you out of the dark. They screamed, and Mrs. Nolan in the seance fell back on her chair, and everybody had to scramble and pick her up. And I swear my vision was Menotti in the balcony holding up his cane cheering.
Yep.
It was the most magical moment. And I teach my students Menotti, whether people want to hear Steal Me Sweet Thief again or not, they're going to hear it out of my studio because I want that tradition to carry on long after I'm gone.
Well, listeners, Vicky gave us wonderful recordings to listen to on our Dodge show that you can find on the webpage. I want to ask you a very quick question that came to mind, and then I have a final question because I know you have to teach.
I do.
I loved you in many roles, but one of them was the fortune teller in Arabella.
Oh, wow.
Arabella,
I didn't expect you to say that. I was waiting on you to say Sonyetka and Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk.
also. But
Okay.
Arabella to me is one of the most underappreciated operas. I think it's a wonderful opera.
I agree.
And I always felt that the role that I wanted to hear you do in that opera was Arabella's mother.
All right. Well, I did sing it for my Santa Fe
You did.
debut. Yes, I
Okay.
did. I was Adelaida. I was her at Santa Fe for my debut. I want to say in 2012 with the late, great Aaron Wall, who then became my
Yes.
student.
Yeah.
And then Aaron and I did a performance together at the Met there. So Sarah Billinghurst was at Santa Fe and heard me do
Right.
the mother. She said, I want you to come cover the mother. The mother's already cast. And then I want you to sing the fortune teller. And I'm like, ooh, the fortune teller's hard. It's like, you get out there and you deliver quickly and you're gone. It's really hard. But I covered the mother, rehearsed the mother at the Met, sang it at Santa Fe. It is a great
Because
role.
correct me if you think I'm wrong. I think you'd be a natural for that role.
It was very easy. I fit the dress well and the hat. I fit the hat well.
I know. So, final question. A singer whom I adored, I worked a lot with James Levine, and he was very neutral and positive about everyone, but a
Yes.
singer that he never hid the fact that he loved her in a very particular way more than most others was Lorraine Hunt Lieberson.
Again.
And I got to know her a little bit. I can't say that I knew her, but it was more than just saying, gee, I really think you're great. But I got to know a little about her and tried to imagine the wellspring of her artistry.
Yeah.
And I got to know her
Great.
mostly when she was doing Didon and Les Troyens, and she had been ill.
Oh, God.
And it was just a phenomenal experience to experience that. But everything I saw her in, I loved her in.
Yes.
And I know that you were best friends.
We were
Would-
besties. And the truth is, I have to credit my mentor, John Moriarty, at the Boston Conservatory. At that time, when Lorraine and I were there, it was the Boston Conservatory of Music. Now BOCO. Now it's the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. And John Moriarty found me in Chapel Hill, North Carolina as a senior. And I sang Connais-tu le pays on a master class, and he brought me to the Boston Conservatory to get my master's. And the first night I was there, I met Lorraine, and we hit it off. It was love at first hello. And coming from completely different backgrounds, but we were immediately drawn to each other. Moriarty now at that time, Lorraine was singing soprano.
Yeah.
So Moriarty heard me in the Met First class and heard Lorraine singing soprano and decided that our opera that year to showcase the artist was going to be Così fan tutte. He said, "You two were born to be sisters." So even though Lorraine was singing the soprano and I was the mezzo, the harmony that I had with her and the way our voices locked and blended in the chords it was something very rare that I really only hear with actual siblings. I have that with my brother, that kind of blend and vibrato the same and all of it. We could harmonize like I've never harmonized with anyone else. So doing Così together, 1984. Yeah, because we did Falstaff the next year when I won the Met. So 84. Then when we got ready to graduate, they said, "You're going to do a duo graduation recital. You have to give the world these duets." I will, and it will come out soon, that there is a pirate recording of our graduate recital with us singing the Barcarolle and some Tchaikovsky duets and Brahms duets. And we do some of the Così. And when I first heard it, I just sobbed. And there is a documentary about her life and the works where I've been interviewed and I've shared photos and recordings that nobody's ever heard that are just breathtaking of her as a soprano.
Mm-hmm.
We began to call each other during the rehearsals sorella. And Lorraine always made fun of my accent. Imagine that. So that developed from her into Reller, Reller.
Well, she was from San Francisco, if I recall.
That's right. She was a Californian and a kind of a hippie, kind of a throwback hippie, you know. And then we ended up sharing an apartment in Boston that overlooked Fenway Park. And we both sang in Copley Square, but she would go to the left to Emmanuel where they were doing Baroque music. And I would go to the right to Trinity Church where they were doing Verdi. So she went to the Baroque early music and I went to the loud, dramatic music churches. Then we would meet in the square, get our lunch, go home, binge movies. It was some of the best times in my life. And then after Lorraine became megastar, way after when she became a mezzo again, she would call me up, this famous, beautiful diva that everyone had on a pedestal, and she would do a rhyme. Rattler, rattler, quite contrailer, how does your garden grow? And she would do something like that and laugh her head off. She danced with my daddy at our wedding. She was part of our family. I reunited with her in Paris, but then the Met did not know our history and reunited us in The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
And so I covered her and I did
by the way,
Wilson.
Heaping compliments. You were Myrtle. And
Was fun.
I saw both Myrtles. Wonderful.
It was so fun and different. See, Lorraine and I did it differently.
I know.
Because we were authentic.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Very different. But what a beautiful time because we could go shopping, have lunch, rehearse together, go out to dinner with our husbands together. Peter and Scott joined us and we went to our favorite New York restaurant at the time.
Yep.
And this was probably the last time I had a lot of time with her before she passed. I think of her all the time. She, again, informs that word I started this interview with, which is be honest, tell your story, and be your authentic self.
One of the last things she did was a Bach cantata.
Oh.
Did you see that? Ich hab genug.
I did. I can't listen. I can't watch. The other thing, Deep River, I think I gave you a recording with her Deep River on it. It just takes me to another place. It's unbelievably.
I commend it to listeners because there's just nothing like it in the world.
It's profound and it will last forever.
Right. As will you, my dear. This was a wonderful conversation, and you exist not only in all of our memories and our current memories and video and audio, but in the fact that you are giving so much to your students.
Oh,
and you're taking what Risa and Minotti and others did, and you understood the value of that, and you're passing it on.
Oh, pay it forward is the only way to be, in my opinion. You've got to give what you were given, give it back, and it will multiply. And that's what I'm trying to do here. Meanwhile, I'm running out to Texas, and I'm in Asheville at the Grove Park Inn, stunning place. as one of the best of our state, meaning North Carolina. We have a magazine that just came out this month, so I can announce this. The weekend of January 3 through 5, I'm doing my one-woman show. Now, you should come back and visit family and check that out, because it's the Dixie Diva in her environment telling these stories and mixing it in with singing bits and pieces of all my favorite arias and music. And there's a slideshow to go along and CDs, and it's just a great group of people. And if they say it's sold out, which I hear it is, I will get you in, my friend.
Thank you very much. Vicky Livengood? Living good?
I'm living good. Vicky Livengood, who is living good. How about that?
It has been wonderful, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. It's been a pleasure.